Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Audrey, and as you can tell, we're doing something a little bit different today. This is going to be my speed build of the Monty Ranch. I'm currently in the process of renovating a lot of the lots in Veronaville in anticipation of my second round, and I thought I'd document as much as possible. So right now, I'm actually in the setup of reworking the shell of this ranch entirely. I decided I wanted to expand the house out just a little bit more. Most of the rooms in the Monty house are about 3 by 3 or 3 by 5, which sometimes can end up being a little bit cramped, as we'll kind of see. And that often leads to a lot of rooms that don't really have a lot of purpose. There's a room that's just a chess table, for example, and that's all you can really fit in it. So I decided to kind of expand everything just by 1 square. So most of these rooms now are going to be 4 by 4 or 4 by 6. I decided to do a little process where I brought the house forward just ever so slightly. So I'd push everything out about 3 squares ahead and then move everything back 2 squares. So that ended up making everything just 1 square wider on each side and opened up the courtyard a really bit, which I really wanted to focus on the courtyard. I think that's such a really cool feature of this house originally. So the bigger I can make it, the better, in my opinion. And this is actually my second attempt at renovating the Monty house. The first time I did this, I ended up making it a second story and it was just too much space. So I believe what I ended up with here is kind of a nice happy medium between the original size of the house and just any effort to make it just a little bit bigger. So one thing you're going to see a lot in the initial stages of this video is just me kind of testing out how much I can get away with making the house bigger. There's a lot of me just kind of drawing and redrawing walls, as you can see. I've actually cut out a little bit of what I've done. It definitely had an idea in mind going into this, but when I put everything in place, there's a lot of kind of just awkward empty spaces or just rooms that I felt like were just a little too big to work with. So I kept kind of redrawing that till I found a size that kind of worked for me. I'm also placing and unplacing the roofs, just kind of want to get a feel for how everything looks as a shell in total. I believe at one point I actually exit out of building this house just to look at it in neighborhood mode and make sure that the roof isn't too awkwardly wide. That was something I really wanted to avoid, but I ended up finding a really happy medium. Another thing I really wanted to do is, since this is based off of an Italian villa, I really wanted to have these kind of arches among the walls. I initially started out with a design kind of similar to what the original Monty house looked like, which was an exterior wall, and then you can look into it and enter it through all these arches. But I ended up scrapping that for these connecting columns. I found this set particularly that's supposed to be, I think, from a southwestern set, but that was covered in stucco. And originally, I was going to go with the white stucco and kind of keep it true to its original look, but I ended up really liking this yellow. I felt like that fit a lot better for my vision of the house. Something I really wanted to go for with this house particularly is try to make it about as warm and sunny as possible, which is why I kind of opened it up a little bit so you can kind of have a better look into the courtyard when you're looking at the house from afar. And I really liked more of a sunnier yellow stucco. So once I placed this yellow stucco down on the walls, it really matched the connecting columns that I was going for, and it really kind of tied everything together. I think it goes really well with this red roof over here. Another feature of ranches particularly are roofs with a very, very low pitch. So you can see here everything's set to be about 25 degrees instead of the usual 45. I felt like that really kind of makes it have this nice wide, flat, expansive feeling. One very interesting thing about the Monty Ranch is that ranches themselves are a very American architectural style. So it's kind of interesting that this Italian inspired house has this at all, but I the only thing I can really say is that this is probably a result of The Sims 2 being a very culturally American game. But ranches are interesting. They originate from the southwestern US, and of course the defining characteristics are their one story, which is why I tried to keep the house one story. And one of their defining characteristics is, of course, they are single story and kind of widely spread out. They also kind of usually have a very interesting shape to them. A lot of ranches are either L shaped or U shaped, which this one kind of is. And that translates to having a big central courtyard like the Monty Ranch does. Another defining feature of ranches that I thought was very interesting is that a lot of the living spaces and bedrooms are kept in a completely separate part of the house from any kitchen and dining spaces, which is something I incorporated in this build as well. I actually had an existing floor plan that was basing the layout of this on. It wasn't a complete one-to-one since I was mainly renovating everything off the existing shell, but that definitely gave me a lot of guidance on where to go, where to place bedrooms, where to place a master bathroom, etc., etc. And then it came to picking out doors and windows. I really liked the original stained glass windows that came with the Monty house. I wanted to keep those as part of the exterior, as well as I really like these stained glass doors. And I have this trick where I take a single door and then I reverse one of them so they're kind of mirroring each other, and that creates the illusion of an actual functioning double door. And I use these doors on the exterior leading into the courthouse. I felt like that has kind of really nice, fancy, lets a lot of light in because I always pictured this branch being very nice and sunny all the time. So I wanted to use a lot of big windows and doors that let in as much light as possible. I also really like these windows from Nightlife with the cross beams. I was going to go with their matching doors for the actual interior of the doors, but I ended up going with this more Moroccan-inspired door set that was made of kind of an older wood. I felt like that really kind of fit this kind of older Italian house. I actually ended up looking on, I believe, Architectural Digest's website. They have kind of an older Italian house that I was using kind of as an inspiration for this. You can see a lot of that with the interior furnishing of this house. But yeah, a lot of this was me kind of swatching doors and windows, and then later when we get to putting any sort of wallpaper inside, I like it. It almost feels like I'm picking them out for a house myself, which I have a long way until I'm actually ready to buy a house with my current financial situation. So this is a fun little escapism. And then it came to actually decorating the interior of this house. I was originally planning on just using the stucco walls for the entirety of the wallpaper, but I actually ended up wanting to break up the rooms a little bit because I felt like it would be a little too monotonous if I kept the same wallpaper for all of it. So I found this wallpaper that I really liked for the kitchen. It has this kind of fake lattice trimming on top, as well as this pretty little rose vine that kind of runs along the top of the wallpaper. And I just think that makes for a really nice romantic kitchen. The kitchen is definitely the biggest bit of what I wanted to focus on with this build. Since the Montys are a family of professional cooks, I feel like they would have a lot of emphasis on just having a really nice, lovely, welcoming kitchen. I do know some friends that work in the food industry, like the last thing they want to do when they are not working is go home and cook something for themselves. But I figure since Patrice and Isabella are both retired and Patrice's hobby is cuisine, it really made a lot of sense to really just make this a very big focal point of the house in general. I also wanted a larger dining room because I always kind of picture the Montys as the type to have a lot of guests over, or just a lot of their other relatives. Of course, Patrice and Isabella's two children, Antonio and Bianca, have since grown up and moved out, but I like to think that they still invite them over for family dinners every once in a while. Definitely had a lot of fun doing this kitchen. I really wanted to have this kind of old-fashioned look. I was very inspired by the movie Moonstruck. If you've ever seen that, there's a scene at the end where just everyone piles into the kitchen, and it's such a beautiful looking old-timey kitchen. Of course, the family themselves are not living in Italy. They live in New York, but they have this kind of old world Italian American feel to them, and I kind of wanted to bring that emotion forward when I was making this house. I also really liked making these shelves. These shelves are really fun, just stocking as much as possible on them, kind of putting whatever trinkets I think they would have. I like this stack of books. I always kind of like putting books in the kitchen. I think they're like a family. Maybe they're. I also really like the stack of books. A lot of times in a lot of my kitchens, including those of my own Italian grandparents, they would just have these giant recipe books just kind of stacked up. And I like to think the Montys have that as well. The kitchen ended up being a little bit large, so I ended up putting just a tiny dining table in the kitchen itself. I've seen a lot of kitchens that have this. It's very much a nice little way of having just a tiny place where you can maybe have breakfast in the morning and then you have your grand lunches and dinner over in the main dining room with the rest of the family. I also really like this painting I put over the table here. In my mind, I like to think that it is the very first picture of the Monty restaurant when it opened for the first time. The dining room is relatively simple. I did end up putting a little bathroom in because I realized I didn't have any bathrooms on this side of the house, and I felt like that was kind of a way of carving up this really big space. So, really happy with that. Like I mentioned, I really like the idea of them having a large table that fits just an enormous amount of guests. You can see I have both this table and then table in the kitchen, and then a little bit later I'll throw in another one outside for any kind of like outdoor barbecue. So a lot of places to sit and eat in this house, which I felt like it was perfect for the Monties. I also put up these little coat of arms and crossed swords. I think I mentioned this in one of my playthroughs with the caps, but these medieval sets that come from the Sims 2 store, I really like using the red one for the caps and the blue one for the Monties. To me, that's kind of their family color in a sense. I also put a stereo so they can have music while they ate. I feel like that kind of contributes to my feeling of them just throwing a lot of elaborate dinner parties. One thing I was really trying to do in this build, but it is a little hard to do without any custom contents or custom recolors, is try to make as much of the wood match as possible. I was trying to stick with a lot of dark wood. I felt like that kind of fits the older feeling that I wanted for this house, but I ended up using a little bit of like the lighter medium shade, kind of redder wood. This wood's very warm to me, which you can see I use in the bathroom here and shows up in a couple of other places. I think it shows up a lot in at least Patricia and Isabella's bedroom, and definitely some of the boys' bedroom as well, but it's a very popular color of wood that we can find in The Sims 2. And then for the living room is a little bit bigger than I initially anticipated, but I struggled a little bit with the space, but I ended up being really happy with how it turned out. I mentioned there was an old Italian house that I was looking at for inspiration, which is why I originally started with these leather couches, because they had kind of old leather couches, but they weren't quite the feeling I was looking for. So then I found these. I think they're from the Moroccan set, but there's these kind of old, almost Adirondack looking couches and love seats. So I put a couple of those down, as well as a couple of nice little armchairs. The living room of the house I was looking at for inspiration had the fireplace as kind of the main focal point of the living room instead of like a TV, which I feel like is a very non-American thing, and I really like that feature. It also had a chess table kind of off to the side, but I ended up taking those and moving them elsewhere just because I felt like it wasn't really fitting with the general composition of this room. And instead I put in a little dresser and put a couple objects on top of that. I kind of like putting dressers in other places around the house too, and just kind of acting like they're kind of treating them like general cabinets for storage instead of dressers to hold clothes. I always think that's a nice little detail you can add in. And then this room in the middle, originally it is just almost a makeshift mausoleum for Claudio and Olivia. Those are the deceased parents of Romeo and Mercutio, for their urns, and I kind of wanted to keep it that way. But it serves as a general entryway into the house. I put a banner up that is supposed to represent the Monty coat of arms, and then a couple of little decorative sun on each side just to kind of fill that space a little bit more. And then I decided to add a couple of potted plants and everything. Once I actually move the Montys into this house for when we actually start playing, I'm going to put Claudia and Olivia's graves right on this coffee table over here. I think that's a nice little setup for them. It still kind of pays a lot of respect to them. Now, the only thing I have to worry about is making sure none of our very upset teenagers smash their urn, but that's for another time. So now we're on to the bedrooms, and the bedrooms are some of my favorite parts to renovate. I mentioned earlier that I did a pre-existing renovation for the Monty household that I ended up scrapping because I didn't like the space of it, but one thing I really did like is how I decorated everyone's bedroom, so I tried to keep that as close to its original self as possible. That's why you can see I put down the wallpaper first and foremost because I already kind of had a vision of what I wanted them to look like. And bedrooms to me are just a really good way of getting the general characterization of a sim across very well. They're always something very personal. They're always kind of tell their own story within the house itself. And I felt like that kind of really shows through with each of the 3 bedrooms that I decorated. I ended up moving Patrizio and Isabella's master bedroom over to this upper leftmost side of the house instead of in the chapel that it is in the original design of the Monty Ranch. I thought they might appreciate something that's a little more accessible. And one of my general views on why I made this house just a little bit bigger is because at some point this was meant to fit Patrizio, Isabella, and their 3 children. So I feel like it should have been a 4-bedroom house that maybe got converted into a 3-bedroom along the way. Maybe the room in the chapel was an original 4th bedroom that they now converted into a little study area, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But this room ended up having the most space attributed to it, so I thought it would make a really nice master bedroom. I also decided to make it also function as a study, so I put in a little chair and desk. In my opinion, Patrizia and Isabella, since they run a restaurant, I feel like they would want kind of a dedicated room where they would have to do a lot of bookkeeping and paperwork, because there's a lot that goes into running a restaurant, whether it is an actual functioning business in The Sims or just in their storytelling of them having this Monty celebrity chef restaurant conglomerate. I went with kind of an old-fashioned style for the bedrooms as well. I like to think a lot of this is Isabella's taste. This feels very much up to her decorative sensibilities, so to say. And I kind of like it having this kind of sweeter, old-fashioned style bedroom. To me, when it comes to Patrizia and Isabella, I always see Isabella as just a very sweet person. I think of all the first generation of Sims in Veronaville, right? That's Consort, Contessa, Patrizio, and Isabella. Isabella to me is kind of the only redeemable one. Patrizio and Consort are pretty rotten, as you can kind of see. They have just this pre-existing feud that's gotten like their actual children killed. And while I think Isabella is involved in that somehow, she's not the one really kind of initiating things or holding the grudges. I think that was mainly Patrizio, Consort, and Contessa when she was alive. Not that you need to be a sweet person to have a sweet room like this, but that's kind of what I had in mind when I was kind of decorating the room, was just something kind of sweeter and old-fashioned. And in the master bathroom, I do believe I maybe ended up with a little bit more space than I would have liked for this bathroom, but it ended up working out really well. I like this 3 counter, and then having a little makeup box that could be for Isabella in the middle, and then kind of having a separate bath and shower. I always like having that as an option for my Sims if they have the space that allots for it. And since this is, of course, a very wealthy villa for a very wealthy family, they have more than enough space for this, so I was happy with that. And then for the boys' bedroom, so the first one up is Mercutio's. And I had a lot of fun decorating this one. I think I've mentioned before that Mercutio is one of my favorite Sims in this neighborhood, and it definitely kind of showed through. I love any bedroom where I can incorporate all these rebellious teenage posters if I think I have a rebellious Sim in mind. So I dedicated one of the walls just for this like overlaid stack of posters and a couple of caution signs. I like how many of those are available as wall decorations in this game, and I can see definitely some teenager, stealing them from existing road signs. At some point, I put in the llama sign because, the Monties are kind of known for their llama ranching, and I thought that would be kind of funny and irreverent, so I feel like that's something Mercutio definitely would have. And then I also tried to incorporate Sims' hobbies into their bedroom a lot, and I found that Mercutio's is nature, which is really interesting. So I gave him a lot of potted plants. I don't see him being super attentive with his plants, so I tried to find some ones that I think were pretty low maintenance, like cacti. He also seems like someone who would just keep cacti on the floor and not really consider the repercussions of that, but I decided to keep that as well. And of course, when you start out the Monty household for the very first time, there's a lot of garbage, like actual garbage in Romeo Mercutio's room, so I tried to incorporate that by having a bunch of stacks of clothes on the floor. I think both of them are fairly sloppy Sims, so I don't think they pick up after themselves as well. And then I moved on to Romeo, so I definitely had this kind of stucco walls with this particular elaborate crowning and molding in mind when I was doing both their rooms. Mercutio got blue and Romeo got red, like I mentioned. I always view blue as the Monty family color and red as the cat family color. And one very notable thing, if you go with that interpretation, is that Romeo and Juliet both wear each other's family's colors, which I think is like a really nice tie-in to their roles in this family feud. One thing I did off camera is change Romeo's bedspread. I ended up copying a lot of his furniture over from Mercutio's. I believe I can kind of see them having matching sets. I think that's just something that adds to the general coherency of the house, as well as, to me, having a matching furniture set is kind of a very subtle indicator of wealth that you can do in The Sims. I don't know if this is just something I've experienced in my own life, but definitely a lot of what I have as far as furniture goes is really just kind of gathered from a billion different sources because I don't have the money to drop on an entire complete furniture set. Furniture is incredibly expensive. I used to actually work for a furniture delivery company, so I have a little bit of perspective in mind of how much some of this costs, and yeah, it's definitely difficult to just buy a bunch at once. So for me, when I decorate for Sims, I kind of keep that in mind, is would they be the type to afford a bunch of matching furniture, or would they have things kind of more hobbled together? And for the Monties, I feel like having matching furniture sets would be a really big thing for them. And then I mentioned decorating to their hobby. Romeo's hobby ended up being arts and crafts, which I find really interesting. Like I mentioned before, I come from Mac, so this is kind of my first time learning about a lot of these Sims One True hobbies. And I think art suits Romeo a lot. I kind of like the idea of maybe when he was first starting to date Juliet, maybe he impressed her by painting pictures of her. That's what this one redhead lady's supposed to be over here, but maybe Romeo just has a thing for redheads. Who's to say? And then since he's Romeo and since he's kind of a romance sim, I made a recurring theme of posters that he has with just a lot of pretty ladies. And then since I'm playing with the 322 traits mod, Romeo ended up getting vehicle enthusiast. So I kind of leaned into that as far as decoration goes. Very interesting little setup for him. And then the bathroom. So this did give me a little bit of grief. In the original Monty household, there's a Jack and Jill bathroom that kind of divides Romeo and Mercutio's room. And what I found in actually playing this house a lot is that there's only a bath, and your Sims will take forever to take a bath, and that sometimes will trap a Sim in one of these rooms. So as a compromise, I kind of carved out this little bathroom area for both the boys so they can enter it whenever, and then Romeo also has a pair of doors leading out of his room, so he's no longer trapped if anyone in his family tries to take a bath in that bathroom. So felt like that helped a little bit. And then I put the bath and shower section in their own little spot just to kind of keep that away, so Sims could have the option to pass through this whenever they wanted to without being trapped by someone who wants to take a bath for 2 hours. And then I moved on to the chapel area. So as I mentioned earlier, I kind of see this as being a possible fourth bedroom. If you look at Bianca Monty's bio, it mentions that she kind of moved out of the Monty household very recently. So I like to think this was maybe where she slept, or maybe Patrice and Isabella were here and she took the bigger bedroom, or we just kind of had a little bedroom shuffle around. But I didn't want to make this a fourth bedroom right off the bat, so instead what I did is kind of made this a little bit of a hobby room. This ended up being where the chess table got moved to, as well as a pottery room. I mentioned Romeo's into arts and crafts. I can kind of see him being really into that, and then maybe someone before then was also really into it. I know Bianca is also very into arts and crafts, so that could have been something she was very passionate about, but I like the storytelling of placing a bunch of different miscellaneous pots here that were maybe failed first attempts. I think at some point, because I know Patrice and Isabella are both retired celebrity chefs, so they're at the top of the culinary career, I might look into putting that culinary career reward into this room in general. I think it would be really good for them to start teaching the boys how to cook. So that might be the ultimate use of this house. It kind of depends on how it's going to be when I actually end up playing it. I meant to download all these buyable objects, such as buyable career rewards, buyable pots, and crafts before actually building this house, but I was having a little bit of difficulty doing it, so I left that for another time. Whoopsie. And of course I put a little bathroom here off to the side so you don't have to be pulled away from your crafting. And then I set up a little bit of a garden. I like to think, even in the retirement, that Patrizio and Isabella are pretty attentive with their garden as well. So I put a couple of actual plots of land, a little compost bin, and then a lot of what you can do to kind of automate it. So sprinklers, a ladybug catcher, which will keep away bugs so you don't have to worry about spraying your plants all the time. Pretty much anything to make it as easy as possible for them, since they're kind of getting up there in age. I imagine they don't have a lot of time to devote an entire day to gardening. Although, as I mentioned earlier, Mercutio is also really into nature, so that might be something he kind of picks up from them. And then I'm very proud of this. So I got this idea, I believe, from Beat Me to the River. I think their renovation of the Monty Ranch also had this, but it is a little shed for the llamas. I also was inspired by Catati's Europa Lots, which has one for the Linguini family's sheep. And I decided it might be really fun to put actual llamas in the Monty household. So I made a little bit of a barn here. You know, it's got makeshift stalls for the animals, and of course a little bed for them to sleep in. And so that's a very exciting little trait. I'm very excited to see how that actually goes in with playthrough. But that is one feature of this Monty Ranch, is a little llama pen. And then I decided on a little outdoor dining area. I thought that would be something the Monties would really appreciate. So I threw in a barbecue, a bar, dining tables. I was even considering a little stereo at some point, but yeah, just the works of it. Thought that would be really nice. And then for the front here, it has this little garden area. I decided to kind of make that into a little bit of an orchard. I think the Sims at some point had the want to buy an orchard tree, so I put that in. And I figured that would be like a nice little place for them to go, put some benches where they can sit, a couple of nice bushes and other decorations. And I ended up really liking this. I'm really excited to get to the landscaping part of this household. I went with a yellow and orange color scheme for the front. I thought that would be really lovely. And then, oh, you can see I put in a plumeria at some point, but because I'm using a bunch of tree replacements, the plumerias are huge, so I didn't really want to kind of use a lot of that, but I might throw a couple in my own gameplay. And then, of course, the courtyard. I'm really excited about the courtyard. I definitely wanted this fish fountain right in the middle of it. Thought that would be a really nice tie-in, and definitely, to me, I think it looks a lot better than the pool that the Sims team was originally going for with this. So, threw that in. I thought that looked really nice, and then just kind of landscaped around this little walkway. kept the same yellow and orange color scheme. I thought that really fit as well. And then added some statues, kind of placed a little bit here and there depending on what I thought fit. I like this look of it just kind of being a little bit overgrown. I thought that really kind of fit the look I was going for. I don't think the Monties have enough time to really landscape this to make it nice and pristine, so I kind of like leaning into the chaos of it a little bit, and I really like how that turned out. And then just adding a little bit of finishing touches, I did some of the railing for the top, kind of like the idea of this being a little top patio. I think at some point I was entertaining the idea of putting a little hot tub on there, but I ended up scrapping that, just putting some nice little potted plants. I thought that ended up being some really nice decoration. And then I made this interior room just another little art studio. I don't know who I want to have inherit this house in my gameplay. With the cats, I definitely kind of have the idea that Juliet or whoever will be the designated heiress, because Juliet's in some hot water right now, but whoever's going to be the designated heiress will take the cat manor. But for the Monties, I believe their inheritance kind of focuses more on the restaurant itself. So I'm not really as concerned with who gets the house. I'll probably have either Antonio or Bianca move in once Romeo and Mercutio get old enough and move out, depending on if they go to college or at all. But when I had this thought in mind when I was making this little art studio, because I was trying to figure out who would actually use this. But I believe every current household of the Monty family has someone who has arts and crafts as their hobby. So realistically, anyone could take over this little area. And then my favorite part at the end is adding some ivy. Since I come from Super Collection, ivy is kind of a recent addition for me, so I think I got really excited with just how much I could put over the walls of this, but I thought it really tied everything together. It made everything look super nice. Super green, super romantic. That was pretty much the energy I was trying to go for with this house in general. And then of course at the very end, I always forget these, are lights and ceilings. Ceilings I did off camera because I literally forgot about that until I was taking photos. But lights are something I always like to add just at the very end. Sometimes I will set everything to night and then just see how it looks there, but I didn't want the lights to just kind of keep glowing all the time, so I just placed them where I thought looked nice. I've definitely gotten really into not using overhead sources for lights in general. I think having them be on walls or on lamps adds a really nice ambiance. The only exceptions are I have an overhead light in the barn because I felt like that kind of fit a little bit better. And then of course this really nice chandelier hanging from the ceiling in the dining room. And that is the Monty Ranch as makeover. Really happy with how this turned out. I really like the energy that I created. I really like how vibrant and sunny it is, but also kind of has this nice classic old Italian feel to it. I really love how it turned out. I really love the use of space. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it too. Like I said, I'm hoping to put this up for download. Really love the use of space. I'm hoping to put this up for download. This was made in a clean Veronaville by Jossa, so there's no characters in it, which means no character files that lead to any sort of bugs. I'm also going to be using the lot cleaner before I upload it and the lot compressor, but definitely, like everything in The Sims 2, download at your own risk. But I will be testing this to also make sure there aren't any routing errors, aren't any sort of bugs or features, make sure everything's weatherproof. So hopefully you like how it turned out. And that is the Monty Ranch. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good day.